Hello everybody, Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
And we've been away. Now we're recording number 205. But while we were away, we recorded 204. And I think we mentioned, as we started that we'd actually left our microphone behind, which I now have in my hand.
Yeah.
And the recording quality usually isn't great without that, but apparently our friend in Australia...
Well, apparently he was able to enhance it, so I hope it was okay. And this time, at least this week, we're not leaning over our laptop and talking into the very small bar at the top of it and hoping that it doesn't sound too bad. So
it did remind me of the old days when we used to, years and years ago, where we recorded things in a cardboard box.
We did.
But
they didn't sound too bad.
No, they didn't sound too bad. Anyway, it was a good homecoming, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, as always, is we got home, and I think I really loved the sat-nav on the way home. We sailed back, we made no mistakes, she was very good, and I keep hearing all the terrible stories about it, but I was struck this time, Adrian, I really was, by how extraordinary the whole thing is. It's, we take these things so much for granted, just like we take the microphone and doing recordings and being able to put them onto a laptop, and we take it all for granted.
What do you mean, this very simple idea that the signal beams up to a Sputnik and then comes up it and comes back to our small machine.
She knows exactly where we are and tells us to turn left or to turn right.
It is quite incredible.
Quite incredible. So I think I was deeply grateful when we got back. We collected our dog from the kennels, and she was deeply grateful to see us. And but there was something else that was almost a shock on arriving back, because there'd been so much rain for so long, and finally the sun had come out, and something had happened to all the grass verges, hadn't it, all the way along all the roads that we travelled along.
Yes, it had. Those of you who remember, they've gone a bit out of fashion now, but John Wyndham's books, including Midwich Cuckoos, Day of the Triffids, he always wrote about strange changes in the world that shocked and frightened people, and the consequences of them. And in fact, one of them was about the Triffids, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which were giant plants that I seem to remember walked across the road,
Yes.
and were able to move around and were evil in some way. But this wasn't like that. But,
No, it wasn't.
But what we noticed was that the grass verges were covered in dandelions, not just the usual few, but it was as though they were massed, ready for attack.
That's how it felt, because they were absolutely jammed together, weren't they? Like an army. They really were. Bright yellow army.
Yeah. And there's not a lot to say about dandelions, other than that people get fed up with them in their lawns, and that we used to believe they made you wet the bed when you were a child if
Yes,
you picked them. Oh, sorry, and dandelions, sorry. And as a child, you when they turn into the little funny grey things, you blew the seeds off them, didn't you?
I must admit that now, when I think of the number of times I love just blowing the seeds, I wonder how many other beautiful, pristine lawns I ruined by blowing the seeds in the direction of people's lawns, including my father's, actually, which would not have gone down well.
It's odd, isn't it, how things acquire their own ethos. But anyway, there they were in their thousands. They were. And we actually looked it up. And just say about what we discovered about why that might be.
Yeah, I mean, what I discovered when I looked it up, not knowing it, was that part of the reason why there's so many, many, many more this year is because of the appalling weather, all the rain in the winter. We're talking the UK here. The rain in the winter followed by a very soggy spring, is that a lot of the nutrients in the soil have been washed out, and weeds, including dandelions, don't mind.
What is a weed then?
Oh no, don't.
Oh, all right.
I can't.
Anyway,
I mean wild flowers, I suppose. Wild things, they have very long roots, very deep roots, so they can go right down to find something good further down in the soil.
Right.
But apparently that's why there were quite so many. I'm sure somebody will dispute this, because that means that my lawn at home. Must be pretty awful, because the dandelions appear to love it. But what I found so interesting, Adrian, was apparently they break up the soil, actually, weeds do, and bring nutrients into the soil because of breaking it up and doing all sorts of good things.
That's right. And there was actually a program on the radio about this, which we subsequently heard, which said that the dandelions yes, more or less what you said, they prepared the ground for other flowers to grow, and that they would then die back.
So
as
they
you
were
say,
goodies, really.
We don't quite know how true all this is, but it did set us thinking about things that appear or are happening that look as though they don't fit with what you want or what is right, and that you have to take a step back sometimes and just check that.
Yes, and I was thinking of a story that we heard told by John Wimber, and I'm sure other people will have heard this, about...
John Wimber, of course, was an American evangelist who became very, very well known, and he was in the recording industry, wasn't he?
And he was, and he did a lot of work with drug addicts and people with huge problems. And his assumption was, having told them about Jesus, he would bring them into his church. Now, his church had been a very thriving, I suppose, although it's America, you would say a sort of middle class. I don't know that they'd use that term really, but a very respectable, that's a better way of putting it, church. And he was bringing all these people in. And eventually one lady, and apparently she was really lovely, but she came to him in tears and said, "You've ruined our beautiful church." And in a way that struck me, that's what happens, if people, situations, bad soil, if you like, lacking in nutrients, they may not immediately, they may look like something you don't want in your perfect lawn.
She looked at the drug addicts and people who were in trouble, or alcoholics, or in various kinds of trouble, and thought, we had a peaceful, lovely church where we sang songs and we enjoyed what we did, and we worshipped God.
Yeah. And he always said she was a lovely lady. She wasn't a critical person.
And John Wimber was saying, as a new Christian actually, was saying, I just asked them in because they that I thought I'd read that they were the sort of people who needed Jesus. I thought that was what it was.
Yeah. And when you actually think of a situation, for example, like, and I know we've mentioned her before, but when Jesus was in Simon the leper's house, and although I'm sure, I don't know, you get the impression again it was a very respectable gathering. In comes this woman, and a woman on her own, and a woman with her hair unbraided, would immediately be the sort of person you didn't want in a gathering like that, let alone when she starts washing Jesus' hair with her tears,
because she was probably
and wiping them with her hair. Well, she probably was, but even if she hadn't been, I think she must have been, because women just didn't go around with their hair unbraided and crying and washing people's feet with the hair. It wasn't done in any circles. It's just that same, and do you know what, Adrian? I thought, well, if I was there, would I have thought, as Jesus did, no, let her be. What she's doing is something just wonderful. Or would I have thought, what the heck is she doing here?
Well, I don't think you'd have thought that. The thing I think is most worrying is that not you, but one might have said, supposing someone had come to us and said, look, that lady's come in. Obviously, she's there's something significant about it, and the rabbi seems to not be stopping her doing what she's doing. But actually, it's not good for the rest of the group here, is it? Do you think we ought to just say to him, do you think you could ask her to go? Because, there's something about the strange paradox of the lady at the back of the church, or in the church, saying, you're ruining our church, that kind of fits that scene. But there is still a correctness, a rightness, and a drawing of lines that create boundaries that don't help. Then that still goes on, I think.
There's still that feeling that you can spoil it. I remember at the height of the charismatic movement, there was a feeling that if one criticised it in any way, criticised some things that were going on in the church, you were spoiling it. You were not part of it. You were not understanding how beautiful the whole thing was. And therefore,
part of that was a drive towards uniformity, wasn't it? Oddly enough.
Yeah.
Like the meeting we went to where the person at the front stopped the meeting because a lady had come up and whispered in his ear and said there are some people back there, which was us and other people around us, who aren't responding to the message. They aren't, or whatever it was that was happening.
Well, that was a particular time. I mean, that was interesting because that particular evening, there were some very large, happy people at the front. I don't mean they were necessarily large. I mean, there was a large group of them leaping and joyfully enjoying the whole thing and therefore obscuring the words on the screen, if you remember. Yeah. So I know we're not too much of Alleluia types, but but also we couldn't see the words.
But it was also that some people, and I'm one of them, don't leap around.
No.
I mean, I can be profoundly moved and sit in totally motionless. But it's just one thing that occurred to me.
But yeah, I mean, and maybe that's not a very relevant example. I'm not sure, but it certainly is part of a feeling that, as you say, you want uniformity. You want a perfect lawn. You want it to look lovely. You want it to be uniform colour. You don't want weeds in it. And actually, when you look at the little group that started the whole church, there was no uniformity. They were all quite different. You'd got Thomas, who was a realist and very brave, but needed to see it to believe it. You'd got John, who clearly was a poet in many ways. You got Peter. You'd got the whole caboodle, and they weren't a perfect bunch. We all know that. That's why gives us great relief. And yet, when we come to our churches, sometimes that's not what we want.
It's more than that, though, isn't it? Because we've always had a variety of people, and most people would say, "Oh, it's great in our church. We have a variety of people." You know, he's like
absolutely.
that, she's like that. That's okay. But I mean, if you look back to, for instance, the New Testament and Philippi, where Paul was with Silas. There was an odd incident there, wasn't there, that's recorded as he came in, was it, or during those first
Well, when he
days?
First came in, he met Lydia and the women down by the water, so I don't think...
And then after that, he was accompanied wherever he went by a woman...
A slave girl,
who was shouting about... Not shouting against him, apparently, but shouting, this is the man who's bringing salvation. I can't remember the exact words. So he should be listened to. And Paul put up with that for a while, we gather. And then eventually, and this is the words in the Bible, he got very angry with her and turned on her and, in the words of the New Testament, cast out the demon inside her that was saying these things, and yet she was saying the things you would have thought he might have wanted her to say. So is that an evil version of a good thing? I mean, when you talk about discernment and you say, do we want this in our within the boundaries of what we do and say and preach?
I see what you mean. That seems to be a slightly different thing, but yeah, do we want? No, we have to be wary, don't we? I mean, I think one of the things you said was warm, willing, and wary are the things that you try and live by, and I don't think they're a bad thing for any church to live by. Willing to allow all of us in, wary, because that can bring problems. but warm. And I don't think Paul was particularly warm, but he sensed something really bad. And it turned out it was because, of course, she was making loads of money for her owners. She was owned by people who used her particular powers to make them lots of money. They got very angry, and Paul and Silas got thrown into jail. So I think that was that. But one of the things about your dandelions, your wildflowers, and of course one of the modern things as well is understanding that we need wilding, we need fields of wildflowers, we need to keep our ecosystem going, and all the flowers that we have considered weeds are actually doing a great job. So maybe we need to think about that with our churches as well, that they bring, if you have a real variety of people, and I like to think we have in the church we go to, a real variety of people from all sorts of backgrounds, but with all sorts of thinking processes and gifts of all sorts. And I don't mean just spiritual gifts, I mean people being people. Then that will bring nourishment to the soil of any church, if you allow that there's a place for everyone, or do you not think so?
No, I do. I mean, I agree about the wary bit. We've seen the danger, the destruction that can be wrought by people who are able to fake stuff.
Right, and that's what you meant about the slave.
Well, that's one of them.
Girl,
yes, yeah. But also, more subtly, I remember in a place where we worked years ago, there was a lady who wasn't actually at that time officially on the team that worked in the place where we were.
Right.
But she had a particular gift for picking up those who didn't fit within the rest of the team and kind of mothering them and looking after them, and she had a real faith, but she wasn't really made for formal Christian stuff. But I remember as someone during a discussion about the staffing and the people there, her being kind of dismissed because she didn't do much. Well, we know there are some people around who do an awful lot, and there are a couple of things about those people. One is they don't talk about it a lot because it's what they are and who they are, and so she mothered people who no one else could mother. By not trying to be a Christian with them in a specific way, but by giving them a place to feel safe in and to feel loved in. So it's not even as easy as that, is it? We were saying at the meeting where we were this week, where we were away, that it's so hard to make rules about Christian living, because every time you set on a nice, safe thing to say, you discover there's an exception to it. And that really doesn't make life any easier.
No. I mean, I this has made me think a lot this week. It's made me think a lot because some of the people who I've grown to value the most that I've met over the last few years would fit the category you've just talked about. And they, if you like, just like the weeds, the wildflowers and whatever, who feed the bees and keep the soil great so that things can grow and just care. I don't know. Maybe I will grow to love dandelions even more than I do at the moment. I feel really awful because I've just dug some out this morning and I've been round deadheading them because I don't actually want them to spread anymore in my garden. But I do value them. I'd like them to know this.
Of course, Jesus was actually, people said about him, didn't they, when they were criticizing me, mixes with sinners and wine bibbers and so
tax collectors.
And he wasn't saying that those those qualities are ones you need. He was saying those are the people who have lots of different ways of. We've often talked about the fact that if you have a problem in your life, if you're aggressive or whatever, to let it be recycled into something that is really useful for God, not useful to the church in terms of keeping it sweet and nice and harmless, but good in the sense that it will really kick things up sometimes and produce
I think
change.
You're a bit of a dandelion, Adrian.
No, I don't think I'm a dandelion.
Well, if you're using all those things.
Well, I just think think that there is room every now and then.
Of course.
For someone. I mean, Luther was. I mean,
maybe he was a bit of a dandelion as well.
Was a bit of a dandelion. Yeah.
That's a new expression for the church.
But then you think about people also who are overwhelmingly kind, who don't do anything bizarre. People who make. We're always talking about apple pies, aren't we? What's the matter with us?
I know what's the matter. You love apple pies.
Maybe it's that. But quietly doing something for the people who need it. And they don't come over as different or not fitting.
Of course.
But actually, and this is one of the things that tickles at our understanding. They are the pioneers and the battlers. They are the people who God has called to do the thing they're best at, which is to do the next thing, the right thing, the sweet thing that will bring love and hope and release and whatever it is to people.
Yeah. They may well be the ones who are nourishing the soil, actually, and who are allowing other people to grow in it, which isn't a bad job.
But there we are. We end up really not with any answers to this, but I think with the understanding that you've just got to be careful. You have got to be wary. You've also got to be wary of your own immediate responses to things that don't fit with what you've done.
So willing to change. We were talking about Peter and warm.
Yes,
not too bad.
Always try to be warm. Yeah. Oh, dear. Oh well, good luck with all that.
Yes, we've shared our great knowledge about weeds, and we'd love to hear from you if you have anything to say.
If any views on dandelions, would be very welcome. Goodbye.